Get up.
Nope. Not until you tell me where my wife is.
Negan was taken away by soldiers, leaving Ezekiel feeling concerned. He wondered if their plan to escape had been exposed. Negan was then taken to an office where the warden was sitting. As Roberts was about to leave, the warden called him back, indicating a strained relationship between Roberts and the leader. After Roberts left, the warden approached Negan with a piece of cloth in hand, the same escape map Negan had drawn. Apparently, it had ended up in the warden's possession after being shown to others. The warden tossed the cloth towards Negan and said, "This is something I found at the construction site. You should know what it is." Negan remained composed and casually glanced at it, suggesting that it could be the work of someone bored. Playing around, the warden was silent. He was just testing Negan, and it didn't look like Negan was lying. Continuing the conversation, the warden said, "The route on this map conveniently avoids the soldiers, indicating that someone among the workers is secretly plotting an escape. When I first saw you, I sensed leadership qualities in you. Now, someone is causing trouble behind the scenes, and I believe it's someone associated with you." When the warden saw that Negan wouldn't cooperate, he threatened that if he didn't find him, you wouldn't be able to see your pregnant wife again. Negan's expression changed, realizing that this bastard had found his weak spot. Furthermore, the warden made Negan a promise: if Negan identified the troublemaker, he could live comfortably with his wife in this place. Negan didn't immediately agree to the warden's demand. He needed to ensure his wife's safety first. Fortunately, Annie was arranged in a clean room, sleeping peacefully. The couple comforted each other, with Annie joking that their unborn child was just as tough as his father. Negan looked at his wife with a smile on his face and felt very uncomfortable. He promised Annie that he would get them out of there as soon as possible. However, Annie wasn't naive and understood the dangers involved. She urged Negan to be cautious, as their child needed a father. Negan reassured her not to worry, stating that he wouldn't put himself in harm's way. As for the warden's threat and conditions, he didn't mention them to Annie, wanting to spare her from worry. But how would Negan choose? Would he resist to the end, disregarding his wife and child? Or would he betray others to protect himself and his family? It was truly a difficult choice. In the afternoon, it was time for work again. The two men are shoveling together when they see the soldier walking away, and Ezekiel asks Negan what the warden wants with him. Negan is vague and evasive and won't say what it is. Ezekiel is angry that Negan is obviously hiding something from him. Ezekiel dropped his shovel and confronted Negan, saying, "Do you think we're friends? We never were. I haven't forgotten what you made me lose. Not even for a second. I can see in your eyes that you're still the same person. Killing my family and people. Apologizing and changing won't make a difference. Even if we successfully escape from here through our cooperation, you don't deserve a new life, let alone being a father." Did Ezekiel's attitude give Negan any idea what he should do next? So, Negan sought out the warden. Meanwhile, in the underground basement of the Alexandria safe zone, Maggie and Carol had successfully made their way through the sewers. However, they had no knowledge of where the children were being held, so they had to search through each house one by one. This was already the third location they had checked. Just up the stairs, there are footsteps in the corridor and soldiers patrolling, which means this is an important place. Carol seized the opportunity and walked to the opposite side, while Maggie prepared to follow suit. The man quickly reached for his weapon. On guard, there were other people inside the house, so they had to remove he first to avoid being discovered. Eventually, they hid in a nearby compartment, waiting for the right moment, because there were people walking around outside, and the building seemed to be their office. However, Daryl and Connie's progress wasn't as smooth. The sewer they had entered led to the windmill, but they hadn't anticipated the numerous obstacles and zombies they would encounter inside. They had to simultaneously kill the zombies and push forward. At night, while the workers were asleep, soldiers suddenly burst into their bedroom, escorting everyone towards the windmill. Two soldiers were holding Ezekiel and Annie, who had no idea what was happening. Upon reaching the base of the windmill, the floodlights suddenly switched on, blinding them. A sense of unease filled their hearts. It turned out that Negan had gone to find the warden and admitted to being the one behind the escape plan. Ezekiel's words, although hurtful to Negan, were indeed the truth. No matter what he did, he couldn't undo his past mistakes. Therefore, Negan decided to take this burden upon himself. Annie couldn't bear to watch her husband die like this, so she broke free from her restraints and rushed forward. The soldiers then forced Negan to kneel, preparing to administer punishment. Annie pleaded desperately from behind, but her cries fell on deaf ears. The others stood by, unable to bear the sight but unwilling to risk their own lives. Ezekiel couldn't be happy that his enemy was about to die. In that moment, Negan didn't show fear. Instead, he looked at Ezekiel and smiled. It was a smile of acceptance, as if he was repaying his past debts with his life. To the warden, Negan's smile was a mockery. The warden wants to make an example out of him, not make a show out of him. Ezekiel realized that Negan was trying to save them by sacrificing himself. The warden didn't care about Negan's ranting. The more Negan did it, the more he liked it, and the more he could plant fear in the hearts of the others. Once upon a time, this tyrant's favorite method of enslaving other communities was to kill a chicken to scare the monkeys and create fear, preventing people from daring to resist him. Later on, he was defeated by Rick and imprisoned in the Alexandria safe zone for a staggering 7 years. Despite this, Negan never felt remorse for his past actions and instead believed he was saving the world. It was only when he met Annie and had a child with her that Negan realized the immense harm he had caused to Maggie and her unborn baby by killing Glenn in such a way. Negan's greatest fear now is leaving his wife without anyone to care for her and his child growing up without a father. Thus, he embarked on a path of redemption. He tried to genuinely connect with everyone, but the wounds he had inflicted in the past were not easily healed. Ezekiel, in particular, held onto his grudge and refused to forgive him. But tonight, just like Rick and his group back then, Negan knelt on the ground, pleading for his wife and unborn child to be spared from harm. History is always strikingly similar. Roberts is shaken, and he's not actually willing to do something like this. Indiscriminate killing was never his intention as a soldier. However, military orders are hard to defy. Ezekiel could no longer stand by and watch. Negan had sacrificed himself to protect them all. The moment Ezekiel stepped forward, it signified his forgiveness towards Negan. Negan proved through his actions that he had changed. Negan didn't expect someone like him, Ezekiel, to come out and help him, and Magna and Kelly, even the unfamiliar princess and Tyler came out. More and more people gathered around Ezekiel in silent protest. The soldiers were at a loss, believing that the warden would back down, but they were wrong. Roberts wore a look of disbelief. Was it really necessary to kill so many innocent people? Everyone present found it hard to comprehend. Seeing that the soldiers were about to open fire, Ezekiel stepped back with them and said,
"You don't have to do this! This world is broken, but we don't have to be."
Roberts realized that if he killed all these people, the Commonwealth would bring him nothing but confusion between right and wrong. You have to do the right thing in life. And the warden is not a good man. His brother is dying of a serious illness and the warden won't even let him go back to visit his family. The warden also noticed Roberts' abnormality at that moment, and it seemed that Roberts wanted to attack him. In this critical moment, the warden resorted to taking Kelly hostage at gunpoint. Just as they were in a tense standoff, the sound of a knife piercing flesh rang out. It was Daryl and Connie, having just emerged from the sewer. They encountered this situation. The warden was left on the floor like a dead dog, but he was still breathing. Most of the soldiers were outside the building. Maggie and Carol, while searching the house, unexpectedly heard Herschel's cries for help, along with someone berating him loudly. Luckily, Herschel was unharmed, just a bit startled. At this moment, Rosita arrived, and upon seeing the room devoid of her daughter, she had already checked the other houses. Herschel indicated that Judith and the others were in another room, but Coco was nowhere to be found. Rosita's gaze gradually turned fierce. Downstairs, the warden was left lying on the ground, and Negan was about to finish him off with a stone when a voice halted him. Rosita, holding a gun, walked over angrily. The warden smirked and mockingly looked at the woman. Just then, one of the deceased soldiers turned into a zombie. Rosita quickly ran over and dragged the zombie to the warden's side. Although the scene was gruesome, no one stepped in to stop it. After all, this guy deserved what he got. The next morning, most of the group chose to stay in the Alexandria safe zone. Rosita and the others were going back to the Commonwealth to settle the score with that Pamela woman. One of the soldiers mentioned that Rosita's baby, being an infant, could potentially be in one of the welfare institutions in the city, which specifically took in children without parents. Negan knew Maggie too well. Maggie wasn't going to the Commonwealth to settle a score. She was going to kill Pamela. As long as that wicked woman was alive, they would still be in danger. A few children were left behind because the journey might be dangerous, but Judith insisted on going along. They set off, driving a train directly since the journey was long. This time, their return to the Commonwealth was to expose all of Pamela's misdeeds and get her completely ousted. Meanwhile, at the Commonwealth, Eugene's trial was taking place, with Yumiko serving as his defense lawyer. Pamela sat in the plaintiff's position, her voice trembling as she spoke of the pain of losing her son. She became choked up and couldn't find the words, but not a single tear fell. After a heated exchange, Eugene felt that the judge was an impenetrable wall, seemingly biased towards Pamela, but Yumiko said, "We don't need to convince her, we need to speak to the citizens of the Commonwealth behind us." Eugene turned to look, and Yumiko was right. The people were the ultimate direction of public opinion. Yumiko then questioned Pamela from the perspective of the crowd, bringing up the recorded evidence from the square. "We all heard the recording of the plaza. The so-called lottery was fixed by you. And what is your explanation for your son's disparagement of the Commonwealth's name?" Pamela's answer was met with an outcry from the crowd. Had she no shame to stoop this low? Yet, no one dared to speak out against her. In the end, under Pamela's influence and power, the judge announced the verdict. Yumiko closed her eyes. They had lost the case. This was the so-called free and just Commonwealth. Truly laughable. The watching citizens began to voice their opposition. But what good would it do? The woman they despised walked out of the courtroom with a smile on her face. Eugene looked back at Maxine, feeling regretful. He had no regrets about voluntarily surrendering. He had no complaints for sacrificing himself for his lifelong love. Maxine looked at her brother helplessly, but his response was cold. Soon, Eugene had a hood placed over his head, ready to be taken to the execution site. He knew there was no turning back now, only awaiting his death. At that moment, 3 figures approached him, Michael and 2 of his subordinates. Eugene's hood was removed and he had 2 tears on his face. Confused, Eugene looked at Michael in front of him, while the soldiers behind him unlocked his handcuffs, which left him even more bewildered. Michael was always a just person. He had only swallowed his pride for the sake of his sister. Meanwhile, Yumiko and Maxine were feeling distraught when they heard a knock on the door. How could they not have guessed that Michael was there to help? Next, Michael planned to gather a group of soldiers who were willing to resist. He instructed Eugene and Maxine to lay low and secretly rally the masses to put pressure on Pamela. It was time for the Commonwealth to undergo a change.